For the last few weeks, I've been watching the Clone Wars with one goal in mind: to understand why so many people call this the best Star Wars story ever told. And after watching season 3 and seeing the Mortis arc, I can finally say I'm hooked on the show. And ever since then, I've been itching to jump back in. So this week I went straight into season 4 to see if the show could keep that same momentum. So with that in mind, I went straight into the first arc. Coming out of season 3 with the Mortis section, Savage, and the possibility that Darth Maul might still be alive, I was genuinely excited to jump into season 4. But at the same time, after watching 4 seasons of the Clone Wars, I've kinda learned its rhythm. Usually you get 2 or 3 banger arcs, and then the rest range anywhere from solid to just okay. So when this guy showed up, I knew exactly what kind of arc I was in for. This one centers on a young prince trying to step into a leadership role, all while he and his people are under attack. This arc is more of a classic Clone Wars formula. We've seen similar episodes kind of like this, but I still found myself enjoying it. For one, this shark guy was a menace every single time he was on screen. Yo, shoot him! Ooh, he's really throwing hands. And while the prince starts off as, let's be honest, this guy sucks, it was still satisfying watching him slowly grow into someone who almost felt worthy of leading. He's definitely not someone I'll remember long term. I mean, I had to Google his name while making this, but I did want to see him succeed. And by the time the arc wrapped up, I realized that I've definitely seen worse from the show, which made me feel like the minimum quality of the show had risen. And as the first arc usually goes, this wasn't bad. So I was feeling confident going into the next arc. At least I did, until I saw him the very next episode. If you've seen my older Star Wars videos, you probably already know this about me. I am not a Jar Jar fan. I was told to watch the Darth Jar Jar theories, and yeah, it's a cool concept, but the way his character is now, he just isn't for me. So when I realized he was going to be a prominent part of this arc, along with the Gungans, I got nervous. However, this episode genuinely surprised me. To me, this is easily the best use of him I've seen so far. Instead of throwing him into fights where he accidentally stumbles into victory, this episode gives him a much more interesting role. Watching a character who's normally defined by clumsiness try to hold it together under pressure was actually entertaining. And honestly, that might have been the first time he's actually made me laugh. And watching the Gungans absolutely handle Grievous was wild. For a second, I even wondered if this was why Grievous is always coughing in Revenge of the Sith. But what really caught my attention was the fight with Dooku. Recently, every time Dooku gets into a fight, he feels like he's in complete control. So seeing him casually handle Anakin again made me start thinking, if Anakin eventually beats Dooku in the movie, are we going to get a training arc or a time skip where we clearly see Anakin surpass him? Because right now, that gap still feels very real. And again, this episode wasn't anything crazy, but I was surprised on how much I enjoyed this episode as well. Unfortunately though, I can't say the same about the next 2 episodes. Remember when I said the minimum quality of the show had risen? Yeah, I was wrong about that. I feel like the R2 and C-3PO adventure formula just doesn't really work for me. The first episode centers almost entirely around these little guys and how they need help. And that's when R2 and C-3PO comes in. And at first I thought the episode was going to be a little bit different. These weird little guys and the eerie atmosphere at certain points made me feel like everything was a setup.
Sensor on them just in case.
Yeah. They're gonna push him in. But then the episode just ends and nothing really happened. And somehow the next episode is a little bit worse. R2 and C-3PO get separated from the main crew and were thrown into another side mission. They land on a planet, they get captured by these tiny people, then they escape. Then they get captured again, then they escape again, then they get captured again. I'm sure you see my point. And by that time, I'm not gonna lie, I just stopped caring. And I don't want to go hard on these episodes. Maybe this was part of the charm watching this show week to week, but for me, especially now binge watching it, I was craving something else. The mythology and the character arcs, and of course the moments that actually matter. And at this point, I needed one of those arcs. Soon. Going into this arc, I needed something. I didn't want just a decent or fun episode at this point. I wanted something that actually mattered to the story. And almost immediately, I felt like this was the one. I don't know if it's just me, but sometimes an arc just feels different within the first few minutes. The music hits a little bit different, the conversations feel a little bit more intentional, even the camera angles feel a little bit more serious. Well, that's how this one felt to me. Once I heard Anakin was ordered back to Coruscant and saw this look in Krell's eyes, I knew something was up. That look is never good. Krell immediately stood out to me as vastly different from the other Jedi. The fact that he doesn't call the clones by their names, the fact that he's nowhere to be found in the attack, and his whole aggressive demeanor. I knew something wasn't right about him. Who put this guy on the Jedi Council? And the longer it went on, the more I questioned if he even was a Jedi or not, which brings me to the clones. In the first episode, we watched the clones reluctantly follow Krell's orders, even when those orders felt wrong. But by the second episode, we see a lot of them start to lose that trust in Krell, which makes the conversation between Fives and Rex so important. This conversation is framed like this moral line that's uniquely tied to only the clones. Do you continue following Krell because obedience is literally what you were created for, even when you know those orders are getting your brothers killed? Or do you choose what feels right, even if it goes against your very programming? And that dilemma is expanded on in the following 2 episodes. Some clones begin to think for themselves, and others double down on their instincts, which leads me into Dogma. At first I couldn't stand him. He felt like the only one that was still stubborn and blind. But of course, the more I thought about it, the more I understood that was the point. He's exactly what he's designed to be, someone who believes that following orders is the highest form of purpose. And for me, that's what makes this arc so good. It all makes sense why these clones think and act the way they do. Rex being the leader of the clones while simultaneously having to enforce Krell's orders. You can see the internal dilemma from him trying to play the middle. Dogma represents the blind loyalty these clones are made to have, and Fives represents the willingness to do what's right despite it not being his programming. All these moral dilemmas clash the moment when the clones are ordered to execute Fives and Jesse, and instead of executing them like they were told, they lowered their weapons. They ended up making the right decision, being brothers over their programming. And seeing Krell put them up to that, I thought I couldn't hate him even more than I already did. But even then, in the back of my mind, I still didn't think Krell would cross a certain line. Despite everything that happened so far, he was still a Jedi, right? Well, that belief didn't last long. Wait, what? Oh my god. The second I saw Krell manipulate the clones into fighting each other, yeah, I needed that man gone.
You're committing mutiny, Captain. Dare to attack a Jedi!
Here, everything starts to click into place. At first I thought he was just a harsh leader, but no, this was betrayal. And when he finally reveals his reasonings, several things crossed my mind. Was he able to envision a lot of the stuff that happened in Revenge of the Sith? And did Sidious have something to do with this? Because he was the one that called Anakin back, and even after he was shot dead, the damage was already done. This changed how I saw the clones. I saw that they were capable of doubt and of choice. And knowing where the story eventually leads with Order 66, that made me start to think, was that decision one that they all felt was right? Was that an act of blind obedience? Or were there clones out there that disagreed? Coming off what might genuinely be the best arc I've seen so far, I wanted to see the aftermath of that situation, some acknowledgement of what just happened with Krell. Did they ever tell like Anakin and all them about Krell? But we don't get that, and that's honestly one small frustration I do have with the show. For massive arcs like Mortis or the Krell situation, sometimes I wish we could sit with the aftermath and hear what the characters think about it. Little rant aside though, this next arc ended up being interesting for a couple different reasons. The opening episode hits us with Ahsoka's people being kidnapped and sold into slavery. And looking back on it now, I think this arc could have been way different. This could have been an emotional point for Ahsoka. Seeing her people enslaved and having to force herself to balance Jedi detachment versus personal anger. And in my head, I imagine Anakin stepping in to guide her through that, because he knows exactly what slavery feels like. However, that version of Anakin was never coming.
Zygerrian scum.
What hooked me about this arc was how layered this arc secretly is, because everyone here is technically a prisoner, just in very different ways. Obi-Wan becomes a slave and he's stripped of his control. What really breaks him is the fact that every time he resists or does something, someone else suffers, which is honestly a genius strategy against someone like Obi-Wan. Meanwhile, Anakin's situation is a little bit different. He's mostly free, he can still move and act, but he's still trapped because the second he steps out of line, his friends pay the price. And literally, while I'm writing this, it kinda hit me. This arc showed me how so many characters in this show are slaves to something. The clones to their programming, the Jedi Council to the Senate, the Queen to Dooku's control, Obi-Wan to his moral code, and Anakin, he might be the most enslaved character of them all. A slave to his emotion, a slave to his attachments, a slave to the fear of loss, and at times even a slave to the Jedi Order itself, bound by rules he constantly struggles against, yet refuses to fully abandon them. That's what really stuck with me about this arc, because when I stripped away the lightsabers and everything else, I started to see something different. A war where everyone in one way or another is trapped by duty, by fear, by hate, or even by fate, and no one here is truly free. I didn't originally plan on talking about the Friend in Need episode, mostly because I didn't have a ton to say about it, but I already know there's going to be comments about it, so let's talk about it briefly. The episode centers on Ahsoka getting pulled into Lux's world again, and by extension, Death Watch. What stood out to me was Lux's and Ahsoka's relationship. They obviously like each other, so I'm genuinely curious to see where this dynamic goes. Also, I thought this line was funny.
Not bad, Jedi.
I didn't miss.
Wait, what? Overall, solid episode. Now we get to the arc I really wanted to talk about, the Obi-Wan undercover arc. This one was a little bit weird for me. The first episode really hooked me in. Seeing Obi-Wan quote-unquote die, even knowing he obviously survives, still worked in the moment. For a split second, I thought I was gonna see the Jedi try to bring him back alive, but once the reveal happens, the episode becomes way more interesting. Now we're watching two stories unfold at the same time. Obi-Wan going deep undercover and Anakin's reaction to losing him. However, the pacing for episode 2 kinda lost me a bit. I expected Cad Bane slowly becoming more and more suspicious, but for a lot of the episode it's just Obi-Wan getting pushed out the group, then coming back later. It wasn't bad, it's just not what I thought. Episode 3 though was a big improvement. Seeing Obi-Wan and Cad Bane interact like partners was fun to watch, and to be honest, this whole episode was just a fun watch. And of course the final episode. Outside of the actual mission, two things really caught my attention. One was Anakin. I think this is where his distrust toward the council and toward Obi-Wan starts to form. And now I'm wondering if each season from here on out would show it getting worse. And the second was Dooku versus Anakin, with Palpatine right at the center of it all. Dooku's plan in this entire fight had me questioning several things. Palpatine had to be behind this, right? So my first question became, what was the actual goal? Was this about testing Anakin? Or manipulating Dooku in some way? And also, this could be a dumb question. Does Dooku know Palpatine is Sidious at this point in the show? Because I always assumed he did. But with Palpatine in charge, you just never know. And with all those questions still lingering, this arc became even more interesting to think about after it ended. And if anything, it made me more excited for what came next. Going into this arc, I was genuinely curious about Ventress. Last season I saw her fall out with Dooku and then get consumed by revenge. However, this arc does something with her I didn't really expect. She walks away from the Sith and returns to the Night Sisters. At this point, is it crazy to say Ventress has become one of the most interesting characters in the show for me? Because recently she's constantly been evolving. From a Sith assassin to someone driven by vengeance to a character with real backstory and pain, and now someone who feels like they're searching for something better. So naturally, I was locked in. What would Ventress do as a Night Sister? Again, I was genuinely curious. Well, at least I was curious until I saw everything go wrong. I won't lie, I was actually excited for Ventress vs Grievous. And honestly, I think Ventress would have won that fight. Talzin was also putting in work too. But by the time the battle ends, the Night Sisters are wiped out. And Ventress is left standing there, alone. Not a Sith, and definitely not a Night Sister. And in that moment, I had no idea what her journey was going to look like next. Which brings me to episode 2. This episode told me a lot about who Ventress is becoming. For a second, I thought she might go looking for revenge again, but she doesn't. My biggest surprise was seeing her become a bounty hunter. which to me said one thing: she's lost, and possibly just wanted a quick identity to latch onto, something that would give her purpose for the time being. And what surprised me even more than that was her choices. She lets the hostages go, she doesn't act ruthless, and she even splits the money, and from what I've seen, that's not something the old Ventress would have done. And so all of it painted a very different picture, like she was becoming a great character. And with her story still unfolding, my biggest question became, does Ventress ever fully step back into the light? Going into this arc, this was easily the most hyped I've been, because by the end of season 3, 2 questions were living rent-free in my head. First, how does Savage's story play out? He instantly became one of the coolest characters for me, and every time he was on screen, it felt like something serious was about to happen. But second, is Darth Maul actually alive? And if he is, how is that even possible? So all season long, I was waiting for this arc, but nothing could have prepared me for what I was about to see. Whoa. What is that? Is that Darth Maul? Despite not knowing much about Darth Maul, since he barely spoke in the movies, this was the last version of him I ever expected. At first I struggled to even believe that was him, but thinking about it now, this might have been the perfect way to bring him back. His reintroduction does 2 things at once. First, it hits you with expectation whiplash. In The Phantom Menace, Maul is mostly quiet but dangerous, and here he's mentally insane. And second, it instantly tells you what loss did to him. There's no need for exposition or anything, it's just pure visual storytelling. This is someone who never recovered from Obi-Wan, someone whose entire existence now has collapsed into one obsession: revenge. And with the motivations clear, and with the stakes on the line, I was more than ready for that rematch.
It is you.
You may have forgotten me, but I will never forget you. You cannot imagine the depths I would go to stay alive, fueled by my singular hatred for you.
That may be so, but I've defeated you before and I can defeat you again.
Don't be so certain. I gutted him while you stood helpless and watched. How did that make you feel, Obi-Wan?
By the time the fight was over, I realized a few things. For one, Savage is really that guy. Another is Darth Maul is far more calculating than I ever gave him credit for. And with both of them still out there, I honestly have no clue who can stop them.